We've instituted some really interesting programs on that front as well. I'll just give you one example. A lot of these we don't like to talk about because we don't want players gaming the system or knowing what we can catch you for or action you for. But I'll give you an example of one thing that we've been doing that has proven very positive. We now proactively seek out social media sites like YouTube, for example, and look for incidents of very toxic behavior and track down the accounts that are participating in those and action them oftentimes before anybody's even reported them or they've shown up in any other place. So that's just one example of us being proactive that I think is going to make a big difference over time.
Wait, go back. Let's hear that again.
We now proactively seek out social media sites like YouTube, for example, and look for incidents of very toxic behavior and track down the accounts that are participating in those and action them oftentimes before anybody's even reported them or they've shown up in any other place.
You gotta be fucking kidding me. So having seen some other instances of this topic cropping up, i.e. Tim Pool's recent video or V's gloriously unhinged rant, as an avid player of games I thought I'd weigh in on this with some thoughts of my own. In case you're not aware, Jeff Kaplan, the lead designer of Overwatch, has announced that Overwatch moderators will begin to examine sites beyond the scope of their game, i.e. YouTube, for instances of what he calls toxic behavior. At least, from what it sounds like, if someone is caught engaging in this supposedly toxic behavior, they can have their account sanctioned before anyone reports them in-game. I'll start off by saying that I am not a big fan of Overwatch. I haven't picked it up in the last year and a half for a variety of reasons, mostly that being the lack of different maps and game modes. Maybe it's because I come from TF2 where there's more maps and modes than I can count, along with customizable loadouts that allow me to tailor certain classes to suit my playstyle. I mean, rip me apart all you want for it, but Overwatch feels way too, well, MOBA-like to me. If they'd had less characters and more maps and modes at the start, I might have stuck with it. I know they've added more stuff since then, but now I just can't be bothered to even sign back in. We've seen the developers of Overwatch implement some very sketchy criteria that can constitute a banning, such as sticking to only one hero across several matches. I can see the utility in being good at more than one class at a time, but mechanically speaking, I see no harm in picking one hero over all the others and getting that hero down to a T. If you have a Mercy, let's say, who's damn good at their job, why force them to switch? You can give me the excuse of promoting players to switch things up all you want, but for me, that's just not good enough. I came from TF2 as a medic, and that's what I know. That's what I'm good at. Sue me for picking a hero that best suits my playstyle. If you really want to force players to switch things up, which I really recommend against, implement a limited life system that allows a player X number of deaths before they have to switch heroes. That makes a hell of a lot more sense to me than banning them for having a preference, especially when each of the healing classes in Overwatch functions in vastly different ways from one another. There goes my inner game designer. Back on point. Okay, so, first off, Jeff, I want you to do me a big fucking favor. Please lay out the terms of what defines toxic behavior. I don't like to see companies essentially playing judge, jury, and executioner with their own customer bases over vague terminology. YouTube itself already has a problem with this, given its nebulous community guidelines. If I cross a line, I want to know exactly what I did wrong, and throwing the phrase toxic behavior around doesn't help. What's toxic to a thick-skinned player like me is completely different from what a new player might perceive. A rule containing vague or unclear conditions is about as effective as no rule at all. Now, I'll give Blizzard some benefit of the doubt when Jeff says they'll be policing YouTube for toxic behavior. If Blizzard were to start looking strictly at videos from the Overwatch community of players who were engaging in what they deemed to be this toxic behavior, it's not something I could support 100%, but that plan of attack would at least be easier to understand. Find some footage of one player calling the rest of his team a useless bag of dicks or intentionally doing things to fuck up his own team? Sure, Call that video evidence, issue a ban or a warning, preferably a warning. It's still overbearing, admittedly, but keeps punishment for whatever offense was committed to within the constraints of the game. Given, however, that Jeff was not so explicit in his statement, it raises a lot of alarming questions. What gives Blizzard the right to police what I do when I am not playing the game? I can see being banned for saying something extremely abusive in-game. But if I call someone on Twitter a 2-bit backstabbing son of a one-armed prostitute, then Blizzard had better prepare an explanation for me as to exactly how my offline comments affect the game when I make them, let alone on an entirely separate platform. But Buck, they're a private company. They can do whatever they want. Yeah, see, that rule really doesn't apply here. A company may be entitled to its own business practices, that's fine, but that should remain constrained to what that business specifically does. The fact that Blizzard wants to begin penalizing or banning players for their conduct outside the scope of Overwatch, and by extension interfering with the practices of other businesses, is ludicrous and sets a precedent that seems impossible to follow. Are we all expected to adhere to the code of conduct when we log out of our Battle.net accounts? If I shop at Walmart and someone at Blizzard hates Walmart, is that a potential offense? Since I'm no fan of Overwatch, you might wonder why I care about this so much. If Blizzard does start policing social media sites for the things their players do, that sets a very slippery slope for other companies. I've sunk hundreds of hours and more than a few extra bucks into games like Payday 2 or Warframe, and I don't like the idea of a game studio coming along and refusing to let me access their product just because of something I said, especially knowing that some players have probably invested a massive amount of time and money into these games. Now look, I'm all for making communities more welcoming. Half the reason I couldn't stand games like League of Legends is because of how the community tended to treat new players. Overwatch's community isn't nearly as toxic, and I mean that, as League's in that regard, but one bad apple on the tree doesn't mean you need to trim all the fucking branches. Blizzard taking these steps to preemptively prevent this so-called toxic behavior is needless and overbearing. This isn't Minority Report, Jeff, and you are no goddamn Tom Cruise.